So we've now reached the final section of the final chapter in Berger's Heretical Imperative, which I've entitled A Note to Christians. And the book, as I've said, came out in 79 and is concerned with contemporary possibilities of religious affirmation. Whilst most of the book is sociological in nature, the last chapter obviously is more than that. And in particular, in this final section, we move on to Berger's concern with Christian theology. So the actual chapter, section heading, I should say, is While Waiting for the Dark Drums of God. Berger himself notes that whilst his book is pre-theological and is relevant to those of any religious background, he wants to end with an explicitly Christian comment. For him, there's no rock of immunity on which to take a stand on faith, but it is still possible to have an existential conviction that the Christian message is the fullest and most adequate interpretation of the experience of God. This doesn't entail authoritarianism and intolerance. Christian liberalism, which Berger is presenting here, seeks to understand the world rationally, with a continuity between theology and philosophy and the empirical sciences, unlike the neo-orthodox tradition. Both neo-orthodoxy and secularist approaches can be laid aside. Berger's liberalism is not the same as the old 19th century version. There have been new scholarly insights, but 19th century theology lost credibility. Its old agenda was the contestation with modernity, but that agenda is exhausted. Now, the pressing agenda is the contestation with the fullness of human religious possibilities. People are still asking what modernity has to say to Christian faith. Probably not much. The poverty of modernity is impressive. There's no need to try and reconcile Christianity with Hegel, Marx, or Freud, or to construct a Christian praxis for this or that revolutionary movement, or the latest sad outpourings by the culture prophets in the mass media. It's sterile to try to make Christianity palatable to secular consciousness. That same secularity is now in crisis. The most obvious fact about the contemporary world is not its secularity, but its great hunger for redemption and transcendence. As an aside, there are still those for whom modernity and its cognitive gifts are startling, disturbing, and provocative. Typically, they have just emerged from some narrow religious milieu from which modernity has emancipated them. We should welcome their liberation, but we do not need to share their awe of modernity or their theological agenda. The role of Christian theology. In this present situation, Christian theology needs to recognize its own heritage and to create a critical distance from the cacophony of modern culture and the assumptions of modern secularity, to reprise the religious phenomena in general and its Christian variant in particular, to reappropriate its own experience and to be faithful to it. It should then engage in a contestation with other religious alternatives. In the past, Christian theology has advanced through contestation with other worldviews, such as modernity and modern secularity. Other intellectual enterprises are probably the same. We should acknowledge the cognitive gains that have been made thereby and then take them for granted. For example, the modern disciplines of history and the social sciences, before moving on to other questions. Other is the incredibly rich panorama of the world religions. It's more useful for a Christian theologian to delve into the Upanishads than the product of contemporary secular ideologists. The contestation, with Benares is the means to break through the impasse of contemporary theology, Christian theology. Continuing the old contestation with modernity isn't going to do that. The chapter subtitle, The Coming Contestation of Religion, is not a sociological prediction. At the level of sociocultural reality, that contestation is already taking place. It's the essence of the pluralistic situation, but it needs to be taken up at the level of theology as well. But will it be, either by Christians or others? It would be foolish to predict what will happen. History is full of missed or misunderstood opportunities. If it does come, then whichever tradition participates in it will be revitalized intellectually. There are contestations to be made with Judaism, so close at hand, but so little engaged in, and with Islam, and with the Indian religions, but also with the local religious traditions of the world. These too represent important religious experiences. No contestation is without risk. From the Greek philosophy, from the contestation with Greek philosophy in the patristic age onwards, through medieval scholasticism and the application of modern historical scholarship to the Bible in the 19th century. Faithfulness to one's experience has both personal and intellectual dimensions, as per the work of Troeltsch. Truth is always its own warrant. What has imposed itself as truth by its own force will not be voided by subsequent discoveries of truth. All intellectual programs fail in the end. There's no final, all-comprehensive, unshakable system of thought. Any particular course of theological inquiry may be fruitful for now, but it won't be the final grand synthesis that will convince everyone forever. Religion is not an essentially intellectual enterprise. Theologians may forget that sometimes. The history of Christianity is not the history of its theology, but of a particular kind of religious experience and religious faith. Thus, the future of Christianity won't depend on any theological program. No one's theological program is going to save the church, despite frequent claims to have produced one. Christianity's future, if it has one, will be based on experience and faith in the lives of ordinary Christians who have never read a book of theology. Theologians can hinder or help in that unfolding. Sometimes they have a major impact, as in the Lutheran Reformation. For the Christian, history is in the hands of God. The New Testament tells us to be attentive to the signs of the time, but suggests that those signs may be hard to read and may be misleading. God will decide when the Lord comes. Until then, Christians can only wait and meet the demands of the moment, including intellectual demands. Religious thinkers have got to do what their situation demands of them. Excessive speculation isn't needed, and the signs of the present are hard to read and contradictory, even in terms of sociological predictions, let alone eschatology. The secularization debate is a good example. Social scientists have found it hard to agree on what secularization has been in the past and what it is today, let alone what its future will be. The same is true of all other manifestations of modernity. Maybe in 100 years, modernity will be pretty much as it is today, and modern secularity will have overcome its present difficulties. Or maybe it will give rise to a powerful resurgence of some religious force. We have to remain open to the possibilities of the future, whilst trying to meet the demands of the present moment. Sometimes what Berger terms the dark drums of God can be barely heard, but at other times they're like rolling thunder. So that's my summary of Berger's book. Particularly thanks to my patrons for their support and encouragement, and my thanks to you for listening. And you're very welcome to support my channel, like, comment, and share on the videos, if you will. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos, and I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. Next week, we'll move on to something entirely different, and I'm going to do a series of presentations on some work I've done on Babi and Baha'i studies, and we'll start off with an old paper, or part of an old paper, on the Babi movement, 25 propositions. Have a good day.